All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ketty, and I'm the co-founder and current head coordinator of the Waterville Seed Library, which is a totally free public resource that gives community members the ability to grow their own food at no extra cost. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I'm going to give a quick overview of the lecture timeline. Will talk for about 45 to 50 minutes, and we'll set aside the last 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. You can put the questions in the Q&A function down below at any time during the talk, and I'll be sure that Will answers them at the end. Additionally, Will Bonsall will be giving two other lectures, one on biennials, when 1 year just isn't enough time, on May 13th at 7 p.m. And the final talk on pollination control when purity matters on May 3rd at 7 p.m. And now to the main event. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Will Bonsall for the first of a three-part series for the Waterville Seed Library. Will is a resident of Industry, Maine, but is originally from Waterville. He is known for directing the Scatterseed Project, an operation that has been ongoing for more than 40 years, that has a mission of growing a diverse array of crops in order to protect diversity and connect people with their horticultural heritage. Currently, the Scatterseed Project collects, maintains, and distributes thousands of varieties of crop plants, many of them rare or endangered. In addition to farming and seed saving, Bonsall is an active author. His works include Through the Eyes of a Stranger and Will Bonsall's Essential Guide to Radical Self-Reliant Gardening. Will Bonsall is the biggest seed legend in Maine, and we are so happy to have him here to talk with us today. Thank you, Will. And Will, you're on mute right now, so I'm going to ask you to unmute and just click the box on your screen.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thanks, Ketty, and thanks to all of you listeners for being here this evening. Special thanks to Ketty and Jen and Brian for making this all possible. It's good to do it in these times when we can't get together in person, that we find other ways around it. And as she mentioned, the Waterville Public Library actually is a special place in my heart. I was born and raised in Waterville, and in fact, lived at the opposite end of Park Street from the library and spent many useful hours there. So it's great to be here this evening. For those of us who love to be more involved with our food through gardening, seed saving is really just the next step in taking responsibility, control of our lives. Especially in these precarious times when a lot of things are uncertain. During the pandemic, most seed companies all over the place have been routinely running out of seeds and not being able to provide a lot of stuff. And it's not something we're used to. And that alone should serve as a shot across our bow to prepare ourselves for future uncertainties. We can't say we weren't warned. Even in more normal times, however, there's plenty of reasons for us to sharpen our seed saving skills. When I first got into seed saving, it was mainly simply because I wanted to cut out my seed bill. I didn't want to keep sending money to the seed companies for the same things year after year, and it was as simple as that. But also, as I learned later, many of the finest crop plant varieties around are not found, as I say, on the shelf, which is to say, not in commercial seed company catalogs. They're not accessible, except a lot of them have been saved, maintained over the generations by families or communities who valued their plant heritage and their horticultural heritage, and they wish to keep those cherished items on their table. And because of that, they saved seed of them, and so should we. Typically, when you locate these very special varieties, by special, I mean sometimes they have some resistance to some variety, to some disease that usual varieties don't. They may have some very special use or a particularly rich flavor or something. When you're fortunate enough to come across one of them and obtain some seed of them, well, then it's on you from now on it's in your court to keep that going for your own use, because very often you can't Can't get it back. I've got many varieties in my collection that the person I originally got it from died 20 years ago. Their barn burned down. They're in a nursing home, whatever. And in some cases, that variety would be lost, maybe even extinct, if it weren't for someone like me, and possibly you, keeping it going. So it's a very, very important thing. Moreover, overall, in the seed industry and in agriculture generally, there's been in the last several decades a really drastic loss of genetic diversity of our crop plants. It's getting to be more a situation where you've seen when you've seen them all, and it's very serious, not just for gardeners, but it actually bodes very ill for the future of agriculture in general. This centralization, this focus on too few varieties. So again, there's a very important role for all of us, including simply backyard seed savers, to participate in it. So we've got to a point where most of our seed that we depend on for our gardens that we get through the catalogs is offered by large corporations whose only interest is their bottom line, which may or may not be the same as your bottom line. So again, it behooves us to take more responsibility for it. Now, after all, seed saving is not rocket science, although some crops do require a bit more skill to save seed of them. And I will, as Katie mentioned, I'll be discussing those in some future sessions, which will consider controlling pollination purity through pollination control, and dealing with biennial crops like cabbage and carrots and onions, just for example, where you don't see the seed. You might grow it year after year and never ever see a seed except what you get out of a packet. So we're going to be dealing with those in other talks. But for now, I'm going to keep it simple. Most of the skills, this is the good side, most of the skills needed for seed saving are the same ones that you need and hopefully already have for growing your own food. Before you can grow cabbage seed, you need to know how to grow cabbage. So I'm taking it for granted. This is not a talk on gardening and growing every crop. We're assuming you have some experience with that. But the main difference is that for many or most crops, the thing that you eat, the part that you call the crop, is far too immature for seed. Just for example, a cucumber. A cucumber that you would pick or buy from the store is perfect for eating, totally useless for seed. In fact, you cut it open, unless it's very gone by, the seed is very tiny and immature, hardly detectable, no good for seed. To further that example, a cucumber, when it's ready for seed, will be 2 or 3 times that size, be big, zeppelin shaped. Typically, they're often cream yellow colored. They've lost their green color. And if you cut them open, the seeds are big and kind of tough and frankly, not that great to eat. So that means you have to leave some of your cucumbers on your vines to go by. In that case, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. It's true with things like peppers. The green pepper that you pick or buy from the store is not good for seed at that stage. You need to let it keep on ripening until it gets red. In the case of most peppers, red is the ripe color. There's a case where you can have your cake and eat it too. You cut open that ripe red pepper, take out the seeds and save them, and also have the pepper. That's nice. Winter squash, hey, you've got your squash and you also got ripe seeds. With a zucchini, you got either a little zucchini that you put in your salad or big, giant, overblown thing that's totally inedible and gives you seed. You don't have one or the other. So those are some examples. When things are ready to eat, that's one of the tricks of the seed saving, is to know when your plant, in fact, your fruit, your seed part, when is it really mature? So if you've got some green beans, let's say, growing in your garden, and you've been picking green beans, you want to save some for seed. You let some of them go by. I mean, get big and tough and too tough to eat, and they'll typically get yellowish and yellowish brown. They aren't really ready until they turn, as long as they're crisp and leathery and succulent at all, they're not ready. You do not want to save that seed. You want to let them, ideally they should get so they're brittle, they're crisp. The leaves will crumble in your hands, the pod will crack open, for example, if it's a pea or a bean. That's what you need to do to have them at the right stage. Now, what happens if you get hit by an early killing frost and you've got some of your pods that are not quite ready. They aren't dried down yet. They're leathery, not yellow, but leathery. And if you get them the night before that frost, before they freeze, because then it's too late. If you were to pick them, or ideally pull up the plant and all, pull up the roots and everything, knock some of the dirt off, bring it inside, and let it continue to cure or dry under cover. Very good chance that those seeds will be okay. It's not the preferred way to do it, but you can do that. Sometimes I've picked tomatoes, for example, that was still fairly green, big and glossy, shiny, but not very red yet, and put them on a sunny windowsill and let them keep ripening there in the sun until they get nice and red. Ideally more than red. It'd be nice if they get really soft and mushy. You know, the perfect stage where you'd throw it at a politician or something. That's where you want a tomato to be, at that overripe stage, and that's when you'd harvest it. Even though it was picked green, that usually works. So this maturity thing is a big piece, part of what we have to think about. So let's see, moving along to, so again, if it is mature at harvest, or isn't mature, you might be able to over mature it, but you'd like to mature it in the field on the plant. Incidentally, there are some things like squash and pumpkins that actually improve. So you pick it, let's say before the first frost, and it's nice and mature, and you bring it inside. You could open it then and take the seeds out and save them. But if you can, it's better yet to let it go even longer. Because keep in mind, when we're talking about the fruits, whether it's tomatoes, peppers, squash, you're talking about the placenta. This is the womb of the seeds. And so even though it's been separated from the plant, your seeds to some extent will continue to feed off that placenta and therefore mature and get better quality. So if you were to keep those squash in a nice warm place in the house somewhere on a shelf or whatever, for some weeks after, the seed will actually improve after you've picked it. It can happen for, I don't know, many weeks. I'm not sure what the limit on that is. At some point, you want to be gotten them because they start spoiling. Okay, so let's see now. We've sort of discussed the business of how to know when your plants are ripe and what to do when they aren't. Now let's say you've got the seeds, you've picked the seeds. How do you process them? Basically, there are two processes, what we usually refer to as the wet and dry process. Most plants are in the dry process, beans and peas being great examples. As I mentioned, lettuce plants, if you didn't pick them for lettuce and you left them, after a while they bolt the seed and they make the flower heads on top. Those look like tiny, tiny little dandelions, and they get all fluffy like dandelions in miniature. When those heads, at least, if not the whole plant, at least those heads must be dry and crumbly. So you pick them off and you crumble them in your hands and the stuff goes to dust and chaff. Then it's ready. Before that, you want to leave them alone. So then you should be able to rub it between your hands, and then you've got the seed. Now, the thing is, the seed at this point is mixed with all that chaff, dried leaf, and all those bits. And that's okay, but you want to separate it. The crumbling it simply separates it, but it does not remove them. Again, if you've got bean pods and stems and leaves and all that stuff, good, but now you want to separate them. With peas and beans, what I usually do is put the plants, or at least the pods, in a feed bag, in a like a pillowcase or a plastic feed bag, and stomp them. Get out there and try, or hit them with a stick or something like that. Bash them until they break all up, and then you can usually pull out the pods of the vines and stuff, and the beans will mostly be separated on the bottom. If they're not, if there's still some left in the pods, well, you just do it some more. At some point, you get all the dry seed out of it. In the case of those things like lettuce that I mentioned, you rub them between your hands if it's a small amount, and then you can just blow away the chaff and have the seeds left in your hand. It's probably safer to put it in a small, a kitchen bowl. If you have a large quantity, I'll put them in a 5-gallon plastic bucket and pour the seeds, the whole thing, the seeds and the mess, chaff and all that, from one bucket to another on a breeze day when there's a light breeze, not a gale, a light breeze, so that the chaff blows away. And at first, it scares the dickens out of you. It looks like, oh, my seeds are blowing away. Take a good look at it. Look at the chaff that blew away, and you'll typically find there's nothing there. And in the bucket will be your good seeds. And you do that again and again. Each time you'll get more seed and less chaff, and eventually end up with clean seed. This is basically the threshing and winnowing process that's done commercially with grain, for example. Well, it works for any kind of dry seeds. Now, so much for that. Now, the main exception to that is a couple of crops like which we use the wet process, like tomatoes and cucumbers. When you harvest that tomato, it's a big succulent bag of juice and stuff. You're not gonna, it's never going to get dry enough. You can't thresh that. So what you do with that, typically you take the ripe fruit, ideally overripe fruit, and I cut it through the equator with a sharp knife and squeeze the guts out of it. By the guts, I mean all that seedy stuff that comes out. Well, it's not just dry seeds that comes out, is if you notice that, and same thing with a cucumber, by the way. I scoop it out into a bowl, and it looks like there's each of those seeds has got an amniotic sac around it. It looks kind of like a frog's egg, little jelly-like stuff. You want to get rid of that. Sometimes people will take that, spread it out on a paper towel or something and dry it. It will dry sooner or later if it doesn't mold first, but it's clinging to the seed, and that is not good. Your seed may be good to plant the next year, probably will, but it'll have some problems, and it probably won't be good for 2 years or 3 years. Properly cured tomato seed might be good for 10 years easily. So you want to get rid of that jelly stuff. And the simple way to do it is by fermentation. You squeeze out all those guts into a cup if you've got a small amount, or into a bucket if you have a huge amount. And you put them in a warm, sunny place like your kitchen window, let's say, and you leave them there. How long? Well, there's 2 ways you know how long. One is until there's a bunch of fruit flies, because they get kind of gross and they get some scuzzy stuff on top, and fruit flies are hovering around it. The real way I've found to be sure is when your significant other says to you, get this stuff the hell out of here. That's the way you know it's ready, okay? At that point, you take the stuff and you put it in, let's say a large, like a canning jar or something, and you add at least twice that much more clear, cool water to it. You stir it all up. And as it swirls around in the jar, you'll see 2 things happening. Your pulpy, moldy, scuzzy stuff is floating to the top. And your seeds, if they've been released from that pulpy stuff, will spiral down to the bottom. So you've got something like this. I don't know if you can see this happening. And you'll find that most of the pulp has gone to the top and most of the seeds have gone to the bottom. There's still some crap on the bottom with the seeds, and you want to get rid of it. So you decant that off. Don't try to pour it all off. You'll lose too much seed. Just kind of carefully decant that stuff, pour it off until you're maybe down halfway. You've still got pretty much all your seeds and quite a lot of crap still left in it. Well, that's all right. Add a whole lot more water again. Do it again and again and again. Each time you'll get more pulp, junky stuff off and end up with pure and purer seeds. After several doings of that, you'll see in the bottom your tomato seed will be clean. The water looks like you could drink it, and you probably could. And you're there. A very similar thing happens with cucumbers. So once you've got all your clean seed, what I usually do is put it in a strainer and use the back of a large spoon to kind of press any of the liquid out, that's still in there. And when I've done that, then I take the stuff out and put it on, one of the best things is to put it on either a towel of really large quantity or on just a paper towel. Spread it out on it, and that paper towel will absorb a lot of the liquid that's left in it. Put it again in a sunny shelf window or something, and leave it there for usually at least 2-3 days, maybe more. And so those seeds get very, very crumbly dry. In the case of both tomatoes and cucumbers, what will happen when it is all dry, you've got this watered up, felty bunch of stuff. Tomatoes have that fuzziness on the seeds, and there'll be a big ball. Well, you just put it between your little hands and you rub it back and forth until they come apart. The fancy name for that process is singulating. Just remember where you heard it. Okay, I got to go singulate my tomato seeds. It's very important. And now when you're doing it, and you have to rub them kind of hard with tomatoes. When you're doing it with cucumbers, you may think you need to rub it hard. That's a good idea because they're all stuck together. But you want to be careful because the ends, the germ ends of those seeds are wicked hard and sharp, and they can do a job on the palm of your hands. So you want to do it, be gentle when you do that. So you end up with that seed, again, very clean now, and you may be, if there's a little dustiness, then you blow it clean. Then in either case, all of these cases, you now have clean seed. Isn't that wonderful? And that seed, if it's properly cleaned, should be good enough, well, to keep for years. We'll in a moment, we'll come back to that. And so let's say you're not sure, did I do this right? Is this seed any good? The surest way to find out is to do a germination test. And that is, there's complex ways of doing it with special apparatus and all that stuff, or you can just be funky like me, and you simply do one of 2 things. What a lot of people do, and I don't, is put some of those seeds on a paper towel, roll up that paper towel into a cylinder, and then sprinkle it, wet it. That's even not funky enough for me. I just usually take a pot or a seedling tray or something and put some potting soil in it, like if you're going to plant it, and plant it and wait a few days to see if it comes up. I'll typically plant either 10 or 20 seeds of a kind, of a variety, and that way I know whether I can multiply the number of come up by 10 or 20 or whatever to know what percent of seed I've got. If you care, if you're a commercial seed company, you need to care because they're legal. Legally you have to have a certain percentage of germination. For your own use, it's not quite so important. You just like to know that you've got a lot of those seeds are good, well over 50%. And in fact, you should have 90-something% if you've done this right. Okay, so having been there, so you've got your seeds and you're confident now the germination is good. There's several things to consider here. You want to store it. This might seem counterintuitive, but seeds to be stored for a long time should be as dry as possible. I guess that makes sense, but they should also be stored in as cold a possible place. Way below freezing, hey, that's wonderful. Sometimes people think, won't that harm the seeds? If those seeds are not properly ripened and properly dried, then freezing will kill them, yes. But if they're properly ripe and dry, freezing will help them. It'll put them into suspended animation where they may keep for many years. A little caveat here. So if you put those in a little paper packet, like a seed packet envelope, put them in your drawer, in your seed house or whatever, they'll keep for so long. That's nice. If instead you were to put them in something like either a tight glass jar or let's say a sealed Ziploc packet, then they'll keep for much longer if you then freeze them. Put them in your freezer. Don't put them in the freezer in a paper packet. They will take up dampness through that. And again, dampness is anathema to seeds. They must be very dry. So let's say you put them in a Ziploc packet and you put them in your freezer. Nice, eh? However long they would have kept, I'll get back to this, but however long they would have kept in the drawer, they'll keep either twice or thrice as long at freezing temperatures. In fact, at the National Seed Storage Laboratory in Fort Collins, Colorado, where they store seeds stored in tanks of liquid nitrogen at temperatures, I think something like, I don't know, what is 700 degrees below zero or something, temperatures that we can't even dream. After that, Antarctica would feel like a tropical paradise, really super cold. And so far, they've found that seeds in that situation will keep for many decades. In fact, some of them, they don't know, they might keep for centuries. So you and I can't do that, but just to give you some idea, the colder we can keep them, the better. Now, here's a caveat though. So let's say we got a whole lot of tomato seeds, let's say, stored in a packet in our freezer or in a jar, perhaps. We've got enough tomato seed there. By the way, with tomato seeds, jeepers, a lot of things are like this, but tomatoes, one single tomato will give you enough tomatoes for probably the next 2 or 3 years. If you saved a dozen seeds, and you could start your own business. You got a heck of a lot of tomato seed there, and great. Then maybe we can not have to save tomato seeds. Next year, we'll eat every one. We won't have to save a bloody fruit for seed for a few years if we keep them right. So let's say it comes next spring, and like now or a few weeks ago, you're starting your tomato plants. You pull your jar out of the freezer, and you open it up, and you take out a pinch of seeds to plant, and you put the lid back on, and you put it back in the freezer. Bad, wrong go. Nope, you shouldn't have done that, because you may think your kitchen air is nice and dry, but there is humidity in the air. And as soon as you opened up that jar and expose those ice cold seeds to the atmosphere of your kitchen, moisture condensed on the surface of those seeds. So when you put them away, they look just the same, but they're a good bit damper than they were when you took them out. So what are you going to do? Well, the most straightforward thing to do is take that jar out of the freezer, put it on your kitchen table or wherever you're working, and leave it there for, I don't know, 10 minutes or whatever, 20 minutes, whatever it takes for those seeds to warm up to room temperature. Then take those seeds out that you want, put the lid and put it back in. And they're going to, so temporarily, for a matter of less than an hour, you've taken them out of cold storage. They don't mind that at all. This is not venison. It's not like if they thaw out, they're going to spoil. They would like to stay freezing for forever. But warming them up for a half an hour will not kill them, and it will make them store a whole lot longer once you put them back in the freezer. So something I didn't mention in enough detail before, and let's go back to it. I said if you saved one tomato seed from one plant, you'd have plenty of seed for next year. There's one thing really wrong with that. And it's one of the things that's so much in favor of saving your own seed anyway, is genetic diversity. A point that I always like to make to people, by the way, whenever I'm giving classes to high school kids and stuff, something I always point out to them is this: anything time you're dealing with seed propagation, we're talking about sex. Of course, that's why most people even tune into these classes, because we're all obsessed with sex, even if it's a rutabaga sex. We know how we do it, but we're curious how other things do it. And whenever I'm talking to school kids who think they know all about this stuff, I always point out to them, what is nature's purpose? What is this point of sex? And the answer they invariably give me once they stop clowning around and giggling is, it's to increase the population. And I say, no, that certainly does that, but it's not the main reason for it. If Mother Nature's only purpose in sex was to increase the numbers of population, there's a much easier, simpler, practical way to do it. Because sex involves a lot of energy. I mean, all the stuff that's involved in pollination and making deals with insects to pollinate, carry stuff, it's a big deal. If they could simply take twigs, let's say a tomato plant, you could just pick off all the leaves and propagate them. That'd be so much simpler than all this sex stuff. But sex does give us one big advantage, huge advantage, that is so compelling that is why sex evolved in the very stages of, even before there was animal life, even before there was plant life, microbial life in the seas. Sex did one big thing. And what is that? That asexual propagation does not do? It creates diversity. So part of the reason for doing this is the diversity thing. Don't ever lose track of that, folks. Okay, so if you save one tomato from one tomato plant, you'll have plenty of seed, but how diverse is it? So you would get more diversity if you save more fruits from more plants, but how much from how many plants? And that depends on several factors. For one thing, is this species that you're saving seed from a self-pollinating species or a cross-pollinating species? Because a self-pollinating species like peas or beans, just for example, it's used to having sex with itself and making babies with itself. The blossoms have got both male and female parts, and they could do it to themselves. Yeah, sounds kind of kinky, but it works for them. So don't be judging here. It works very well, and it helps them to keep purity without your doing anything. And therefore, saving one bean from one bean plant will pretty much give you the genetic diversity of the whole population. With corn, corn is highly outbreeding, and it needs, in order to keep, you want to avoid this thing called the opposite of heterosis, which basically is inbreeding depression. You want to avoid incest, and to do that, you want a fairly large number of plants. And there are some complications to that, which I'll try to go into a little detail about. But so with some plants, some crops, very few plants would do it. With some, you need much more. Corn is a great example. Let's say you're saving your own sweet corn seed. And first of all, I'm presupposing you've got some way of keeping the raccoons out of there, because if not, you're probably not going to get any sweet corn on the cob to eat in July anyway, let alone any seed to harvest in September. So you got to deal with the coon thing. That's another matter. I use electric wire and stuff, but that's one thing. But you also want to have a large enough population of plants. And some people will tell you got to have at least 200 plants minimum to keep the gene pool intact, to have the genetic diversity of that thing. I won't dispute that, but that can be really difficult if you're only growing a few rows of corn, and 200 plants would be your whole bloody crop, okay? That's not gonna work so good. So there's other ways of dealing with it. One of them is to save a smaller population, let's say a dozen plants this year, a dozen ears from a dozen different plants, not 2 ears from the same plant. Save them, and next year save a couple from a different plants. So over time, that can help you somewhat, even though some of them they're just recrossing with this last generation. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it might be, let's say we're carrots, for example. Okay, let's say Kitty here likes growing carrots, and so do I. And we both like the same 2 varieties. She loves Danvers Half Long and Scarlet Nance, and so do I. but she's only got place in her garden because they cross-pollinate. So she can only isolate one of the other, and I can only isolate one of the other. So we might do like a cooperative or community strategy. Every year, both Ketty and I grow both of those two varieties, because growing the carrots, hey, there's no sex there. We don't care about that. You don't get pregnant just sitting next to someone on the bus, okay? Having them in the same garden, not an issue. But the second year, we're getting to biennials now, which we're talking about another session. Ketty, we got an agreement between us. She's going to grow all the seed for Scarlet Nance for both of us. I'm going to do the red cord Chantenay for both of us. Or what did I say? No, I think I said whatever the other variety I mentioned was. Okay. And that works very good. So we're supplying each other the seed for at least next year, maybe the year after. The only hitch with that is, can I trust Ketty? Is she going to do a good, decent job? Can she trust me? If she knows that my field is all surrounded by Queen Anne's lace, which is not wild carrot, but feral carrot, then she's not going to want the seed that I'm growing. So if you can work around those details, it's well worth it. A cooperative strategy for saving seeds means we both can eat most of our carrots and yet have plenty, have a good population base and have plenty of good seed for each other. So somehow or other, we have to deal with this population size thing. Now, let's see. And again, to do that, and I don't think we have time enough to go there tonight, you need to know what your crop is. It helps to know what species it is. We'll be dealing with this a lot more when we get to the pollination control thing. But you particularly need to know whether it's a cross-pollinator or a self-pollinator. And you also need to know, so that'll tell you automatically whether you need to save a large population size or just a few will do it. So population size is definitely an issue. Moving right along. Let's see, we talked about the processes and we talked about the freezing thing. Okay, let's see, several other factors I want to cover here. One was, one of the things that is helpful to know, this is getting off to so much the how-to, is give you some important references. Obviously, you all know where you can get seeds. You go to the seed company, go to Fedco, go to Johnny's, go to Gardens, go to Pine Tree or whatever. You get your seeds. But let's say you want to grow your own and you want to find some varieties that Johnny's and Fedco and Pine Tree doesn't have. You want to find some of these interesting heirloom varieties. Well, I can give you several sources off the top of my head. One of the biggest and best ones in the country is the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa. It's an international organization of people who save their own seeds and reoffer them. You can get some wicked cool stuff there. They've got all kinds of heirloom varieties from everywhere, all kinds of crops. We have an organization of our own, a small group of us, which I founded, called Grassroots Seed Network. You can find us online. And it is a much smaller group of people who also are saving seeds and making them available. That's great. And you also might find them just yourself. You might have a neighbor who has some variety that's been in their family for years. I'm often find either at fairs, like a Common Ground fair, or when I go to Granges and I'm giving talks there on seed saving, almost inevitably some little old man or little old lady will come up to me after saying, well, we got this bean we've had in the family for 10 generations. You ever seen it before? And I'll get some seed. And this is a true heirloom seed. No one's, it never was on a shelf anywhere. No seed company ever offered it. So it's so exciting to get there. And like I say, that's how you get these things. Now it's up to you to keep it, because that guy maybe is going to croak next year and that variety is going to become extinct unless you have got your act together. So those are some of the places you can get find seeds. Incidentally, there is, do I have it here? Yes, I do. I'm going to try to show this to you, if I can back up enough to, this is the garden seed inventory. I don't know. Anyway, I can tell you about it. It's published by the Seed Savers Exchange, the same organization in Iowa. And this one I'm showing you is the 6th edition. I don't know if there's been a more recent one. I don't think so. What it is a catalog of catalogs. It's a list in there of every variety that's grown commercially, that's offered by, I think, 300 or so seed companies in the United States and Canada, I believe. And so if there's some variety that you used to get and the company that used to get it from no longer carries it, you want to find if anyone else has it, a very important resource. You might look there and find that 12 other companies have it. So these are all different sources of things. I get a lot of material for my collections from the USDA, from the National Germplasm System. This is it's your tax dollars at work. You don't pay anything for these seeds. However, it is not intended to certainly is not intended to be used like a seed company. That would be abuse. They generally deal with plant breeders, researchers, and stuff. They don't really want to see you. And it's hard to access unless you know how the system is set up, you know who's got where, which are the regional facilities. So it's not widely available to you. But because of that, one of the things that I do, I've been dealing with the system for about 40 years. They know me. I know most of the people. In fact, a lot of them are retired or dead since I started this thing. But I know where they are, and I have their inventories. I have the online, or in many cases hard copy lists of what they have to offer them, and I'm routinely getting those things from them, things which I think someone like you might be interested in, and then I turn around and offer them for my Scatterseed project. So that is only useful to you indirectly, frankly. So I've given you a lot of sources. And then one of the other things I wanted to add to that, I'd be very remiss if I don't urge you, once you learn how to save seeds and come across some seeds of your own that you, wherever you got them from, to not only keep them available, but you in turn be not only a seed saver, but a seed sharer. Join one of these organizations and share these with other people. It's very important. Then you become a part of the solution. I'd like to urge you all to do that. Now let's see. I can go into a little more detail on some of these things. Let's say, we talked about corn, for example. A very important thing with corn is if you want to get ripe seed, you've got to keep the raccoons out of it. I don't know what works for you, but what works for me is to put a double wire around it, about 10 inches off the ground, on insulated stakes with insulators, and hook it up to a current. And you need a charger, which will take your, whether if you have a 12-volt battery or if you're using house current, it'll ramp it up to be about 5 or 6 or 7,000 volts. That's what you need to intimidate a raccoon. They love corn. Even, I'm not going to say as much as I do because that's theoretically impossible, but they like it enough that they'll put their nose right on there and they'll come back night after night. So you really gotta intimidate them with that. It works very well. And it also is very helpful with crops where you have trouble with the deer cleaning them out, like pole beans, and the deer will be picking them off the poles. And again, I'll put an electric fence around the patch, but in this case, the electric wire is about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And again, with a charger. And the problem with that is one single wire. The deer can step over that almost, they can certainly jump over it. It's so easy. The trick with that is you train them to put their tongue on that wire. You want them to test it. And so what you do is I take little pieces of aluminum foil and I staple them onto the wire when it's not on, by the way. I'm interested in not getting shocked. And I take a mixture of some crappy peanut butter and some junky jelly, mix it together and smear it on each of those things. So they'll smell it and they'll come up and they'll put their tongue on that thing. And they'll decide that they really are not interested in Will Bonsall's pole beans at all. They'll go off and find something in my woodlot, which I'd much rather prefer they eat. So there's a whole lot of things like that, but these are all basically the things that you already had to figure out in order to get a crop of food. They just become all that more critical when you want to get a seed crop too. We talked about population size. In the future talks, we'll give it. I won't bother go into it this time into that aspect of those things which are cross pollinators, and the problem that you'll have if you have 2 of them too close to each other, then they will cross, and you will end up not really having either one. We're gonna have to deal with that one, but again, we tell you how in the class. And Ketty, I think you said, I didn't understand it that way. I think you said that the second class in this series is the one on seed purity, and the third one is biennials, or did I get that right? It's all the same to me. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing.
It'll be biennials, then seed purity.
Okay, so the next time we get together, we'll be talking about things like carrots, leeks, and so forth, and then later the pollination control. So there's so much more to this. This whole thing of seed saving is a very big ball of wax, and to cover it all in one session, we're not going to. I've tried not to be too superficial over this, but I'm trying to introduce you to the idea and give you some of the very basic information you need to inspire you to keep going, to get into this deeper. But again, if you're wanting to take more responsibility for your own life, your own food, what's on your plate, I would urge you to do this. Sometimes people say, what should I save seeds of anyway? What kinds of seeds, what varieties of seeds do I recommend? And my usual answer to that is, what are you currently growing? What are you currently putting on your plate? I know lots of people that'll big collections of tomatoes, because hey, tomatoes are really sexy. They all look really, really different from each other. And they used to be considered really sexy. They used to be considered an aphrodisiac, but I think we've got over that idea. But still, they're a very attractive plant, very diverse, and they are annuals and self-pollinators. You could plant 10 varieties all in the same garden, save seed from all of them, and they're annuals, so you can plant them in the spring, save the seeds in the fall, and go to Aruba for the winter, and you're okay, you've still got good seeds. That's nice. So they tend to be a crop that a lot of people do. Beans. Well, that's cute, that's nice, but I like to see people focus more on whatever the thing is that you grow. If you're not in the habit of growing kohlrabi and eating kohlrabi, then you don't need to learn how to save kohlrabi seed. When I first started out seed saving, again, as I mentioned earlier, my main focus was to not have a seed bill. I didn't know about all this genetic diversity, germplasm extinction. I didn't know, it wasn't on my radar, and I had never heard of an heirloom seed before. And so when I finally did, a man, old fellow across town who was a dairyman, I used to work for him off and on and help him in his garden. And I discovered he had several things in his garden that I never heard of that weren't in any commercial seed company. He had a kind of a white runner bean. He thought it was a lima bean. We called it Carolina lima bean, but it's actually a white runner bean related to scarlet runner bean. So cool. You can't grow lima beans in the north. Well, this one you can. It's because it's not a lima bean and you can use it like a lima bean. He had several other different interesting things, like squash variety things. And that's when I first learned about heirloom seeds. Hey, there's people out there that have these cool things and they're not on the show. You can't buy them anywhere. So anyway, it's great to be on the lookout for those things. Okay, I'm missing the point that I was heading for with that. But if we want to take more responsibility for our life, then it involves getting involved with these plants. Because a lot of these things, they're things that we don't usually deal with in their whole life cycle. Like I know people that grow green beans year after year, and every year they go back to the company for seed. And what if that's not available? Then you're really in bad shape. So learning how to take it to the next stage. No, don't just know what a green bean is until it's a green bean. Learn what it is until it's a dry bean. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's follow these things through their whole life cycle. Another thing I'll just mention now too about saving seed, even if you don't care about the seed itself, a lot of these plants, this is especially true of biennials, which again, we're talking about later, but a lot of these seed plants, also, they do double duty. They not only give you seeds, but often in their flowering stage, many of them will serve as nectaries. In other words, they will attract nectar-feeding insects, which in other parts of their life are beneficial. They're predators. In other words, if you have some carrots going to seed or parsnips growing to seed in your garden, that nectar will feed syrphid wasps, for example. A tiny little wasp. You hardly see them. They hover around the place. And in other parts of their life, they eat, if I'm right, it's either, I think it may be aphids. So by growing, having crops go to the seed stage, even if you don't care about the seed, you'll be increasing the genetic, the ecological diversity of your whole garden, of your whole horticultural landscape, to the benefit of you and your garden plants. Another cool reason to do it. And so there's a whole lot more I think I could think of, but I think I'd rather hear Ketty. I think it's a good time to let other people either vent their frustration at me or give me their opinions, and hopefully I can give them useful feedback. Should we go there now?
Yes, let's do it. We have a couple of questions already, and if anyone else wants to submit questions, just click on the Q&A down at the lower right-hand section of your screen. So the first question is a bit of a personal preference for you, Will. Do you have a favorite plant to cultivate from seed?
I got to tell you, first of all, whoever the questioner is, that's one of the most annoying questions I ever get. People are always asking, what is your favorite potato variety, or what's your favorite anything? And it's impossible to say that. The only sense I can give of a favorite, there are some things which are particularly easy to save seeds of. whether or not they're my favorite thing to eat. Just for example, I have in my Scatterseed project, I have about 11 or 1,200 varieties of peas. And they're not only field peas, snow peas, snap peas, table peas, and so on. So they're easy to grow. I wouldn't say that makes them my favorite, but peas and beans are really cool that way. One of my favorite crops that I've kind of noted for eating, among my favorite foods, and certainly for seed saving, is the Rutabaga, which most people here in Maine call turnips. But turnips, darling, that we put in our New England boiled in a week, they call them turnips, but otherwise they call them rutabagas. And I love them. I have one of the largest collections on the planet, which is to say, a couple hundred or something. They're not a very diverse crop, but I love them very much and have a very large collection of them. But they turn me on. I get excited about rutabagas. That's not probably really the answer to your question. I don't think I have one.
That's all right. So if we were to zoom out a little bit, what is the end goal that we should be working for in regards to seed saving? Should seeds be a complete public commodity? What do you think?
So we're talking about larger, not us as individuals, but larger policy and philosophical issues. And yeah, there are some things I do feel strongly about, and I would have mentioned. I'm very grateful for your listener for bringing this up. It is possible in this country, for example, to patent seeds. As an author, I'm totally into patenting intellectual property, like the books and songs and plays. Yes, so you do the work of doing it. The idea of patenting a life form is very confusing and somewhat reprehensible, because if I breed a cabbage variety, for example, I didn't create cabbagedom. Cabbage, I guess all I've done is take and know the variety that I work for, the stuff that I'm breeding from. It's like if I were trying to patent the alphabet because I wrote a book. All I'm doing is taking those components that others have kept going for thousands of years, varieties, and putting a cherry on top. I'm coming up with a new improvement. And so I'm generally very skeptical about patenting varieties at all. There's one way, by the way, that people, this is another thing I should have brought, that seed companies, seed breeders get around that. If you breed a new Brussels sprout, let's say, and you're afraid that people are going to start saving the seeds, you spent 10 years, you spent your whole career breeding a new superior Brussels sprout, and you're afraid that they're just going to save their own seed, or every seed company is going to steal it propagate it their own, and maybe change the name of it. How can you avoid doing that? One way is you can patent it. And it's a rather expensive process, because proving that it really is like patenting anything, you have to prove that you really are the creator of that, which is fortunately is not easy, because you really aren't the creator of it. But there's another way around it, and one way is you never stabilize that variety. You create an F1 hybrid, and you keep it as an F1 hybrid, because it is not practical generally to save seeds from F1 hybrids. These are inbred lines, which it's kind of like trying to open up a combination lock. Unless you know the combination of things, of parents that got it there, you'll be spending an awful lot of time to try to get somewhere and probably would never get that way. Therefore, you're going to keep going back to the company every year, to the breeder every year for the same things. Therefore, I say, as far as saving seeds of hybrids, generally don't go there. There are exceptions, however. You can take an F1 hybrid and you can stabilize it. This can take quite a few seed generations to do, but you can get it so it is no longer hybrid, so it comes true to type. One of my favorite examples is Clear Dawn onion, which basically someone took a wonderful copra, a wonderful F1 hybrid onion, and they stabilized. They did the work for us, and they created a new variety. Yes, you can do that if you want, and I urge anyone who's that excited about it to do that. I've got a lot more to do with my time, quite frankly, but I think it's a great idea. And then you in effect are creating a new variety. You would name it, my favorite or something. But generally, hybrids have that problem. So I'm down on that. I am particularly completely against the idea of GMOs. This is the most perverse thing I can imagine, taking things, particularly things of different species, sometimes different genera. When we have the technology now to take the genes out of a flounder fish and put them into a strawberry. Or they have bred corns, for example, using fireflies for the genes to get some particular trait that they want. But incidentally, they've come up with actually lines of corn where the corn plants glow in the dark. So it's that kinky. It's pretty weird, and I think it's scary as hell. And it's very important, I think, that we not only boycott GMO seed. If you see something in the market, that the best way to do that is to only buy organic. That's the way you can be sure it's not free of GMOs. But a big percentage of the food on your table, unless you're buying organic, is GMO. And so the only way you're going to effectively get rid of this is to boycott those foods. Demand labeling. There's some action in Maine right now going on to that. So eventually we'll form a compact with some other states that it will be illegal to sell GMOs things without at least that be labeled. So yeah, that is, and the Terminator technology and that kind of stuff. That's all just pervy as could be. We should not allow it, let alone consume it ourselves. So, although otherwise I have no opinions on the subject.
Love to hear that. So one person was wondering, if you save your own seeds, do they keep for very long? Is it the same amount that commercial seeds will germinate for, or what is that timeline?
Probably at least as good, because the seed that you buy from a commercial seed company is not necessarily last year's fresh seed. It might already be a year old. They're legally required to do a germination test, and it will say the germination is, let's say, 85, 90%. It may say packed for 2021. That does not necessarily mean it was grown in 2020. And so therefore, the seed that you planted last year, that's, so therefore you may have better viability with it. You know what you've got. I think that might be the answer that they're looking for.
Thanks. We have one more question about being an amateur gardener. If you're, seed saving for the first time, is there one specific crop that you would recommend starting with?
Yes, I would. Two of them, actually, beans or tomatoes. Because again, there's two hoops you have to jump through with some of the other crops. Like I say, the crossing thing and the biennial thing. With those crops, particularly beans, you can have 20 beans all growing together in your garden, dry beans, green beans, wax beans, or whatever, and save the seed. And they're annuals. So beans are probably the easiest single thing. Tomatoes, I'd say the second, adding that caveat that I mentioned already, the processing, that wet process. I'd strongly recommend starting with those, but don't stay there. Try that next year, this coming year. Learn about those, and then keep moving on. Learn how to save your own rutabaga seed next year. I'd be happy to share that with you.
Great. And then we have one last question. Is the cost of commercial seeds directly correlated to how difficult it is to save those seeds? Like the 1-step or the 2-step or the 3-step process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I know the answer. I'm sure the cost of production is a big factor in it, but I suspect it probably is the biggest thing. But like anything else in the marketplace, the demand for it. Some variety that's super popular is probably not going to be selling for as long. Incidentally, that gets back to this other issue: is seed companies, the varieties they offer, whether they continue offering it will depend on the demand. And if their demand isn't there, they're going to drop it. A good example is peas. You might see some variety, which if you were looking at garden seed inventory I mentioned earlier, you might see 10 companies, 20 companies are all offering this variety of pea. So it's not in any danger, is it? It's totally safe. It's all over the place. You will find that almost none of those companies grow their own seed. They get it from one company. And most of the pea seed grown in this country is grown in the Snake River Valley of Idaho by one single company. And they're the source for all of the other, the retail companies. And so if their seed sales of that thing are not, the volume of sales is not big enough to justify it, then they will drop that variety. And so it's more than theoretically possible. It's entirely likely some variety this year is all over the place. Next year it disappears. It becomes commercially extinct. It may be far from extinct, but commercially extinct. And unless you are saving your own seeds, it is in effect extinct.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Will, and thank you everyone for coming. Our next talk again will be about biennials, when 1 year just isn't enough time, and that will be again on a Thursday at 7 p.m. on May 13th. So thank you all for coming.
And briefly, I would like to, one thing I forgot to do, I believe I've already showed my book, and the other book I don't think I mentioned, a friend of mine wrote it. This is not as comprehensive as mine about that. Beginning Seed Saving by Jim Uliger. I'm sure you can find it online. He's over in Vermont, did a really good job of demystifying this. And it's again, it's entry level, very, very good. And also another point is this year, many of us are distraught, or this last year, at not being able to attend because there wasn't any, the Common Ground Fair, Maine Organic Farming Gardening Association's fair. We hope very much it will be this year. And if so, I want to urge everyone to join, because if you haven't yet been to the Common Ground Fair, well, you haven't lived yet. What can I say? Just going to mention that.
Great, thank you, Will.